What if I told you a single white envelope slid across polished oak at 9:42 on a gray Thursday morning, made an entire courtroom forget how to breathe for 3 full seconds? Before we open that envelope, drop a comment telling us the one punishment you think should happen when someone tries to buy justice. Because what Judge Caprio did next turned a routine hearing into the kind of moment millions would talk about for weeks. The shocking part was not the cash. It was not even the note folded beneath it. It was the look on the attorney's face when Judge Caprio tapped the envelope once with 2 fingers and said, "Calm as winter, open it now." Hit that subscribe button if you believe the quietest people in a room are often the most dangerous ones to underestimate. This was the kind of silence that had texture, the kind you could feel pushing against your ears, the kind that makes a cough sound like a siren. And in that silence sat Evelyn Mercer, 43 years old, wrapped in a camel Max Mara coat, her honey blonde hair pinned into a perfect knot, her Christian Louboutin heels crossed at the ankle, her face still carrying the hard confidence of a woman who believed money could soften almost any blow. By the end of that morning, her mascara would be streaked down both cheeks, her hands would be shaking so badly she could barely hold a tissue, and every lie she had leaned on would be lying broken at her feet. Like this video, if you believe some people don't really meet themselves until the truth corners them in public. Share this with someone who needs to see what happens when arrogance mistakes kindness for weakness. Because this story did not begin with an envelope. It began 3 months earlier, on Tuesday, October 14, 2025, at exactly 8:17 in the morning on the corner of Waterman Street and Brook Street in Providence, Rhode Island, where a pearl-white 2022 Range Rover Sport drifted 6 inches over a faded stop line, then 12, then all the way through a red light while its driver was looking down at a phone that should never have been in her hand. The man crossing through that green signal was Mateo Ruiz. And when Evelyn Mercer hit him, she did not just wreck a scooter. She shattered 3 different lives before the first police cruiser even arrived. Mateo Ruiz was 29. He lived in a 2-bedroom apartment off Chalkstone Avenue with his 8-year-old daughter Anna and his mother Rosa, who had partial weakness in her left leg after a stroke the year before. Mateo drove food deliveries during breakfast and lunch, then worked evening prep in the kitchen at Bellini's on Atwells Avenue. He slept in fragments. He paid bills in layers. He owned exactly 4 collared shirts that still looked nice enough for school meetings. He also never missed Anna's Wednesday spelling practice and never forgot Rosa's blood pressure medication. At 8:17 that morning, Mateo was on a Navy Honda PCX scooter with a thermal delivery bag strapped to the back and a paper pharmacy package tucked under his left arm. Inside that pharmacy bag were 2 insulin pens Rosa needed by noon. He had picked them up before taking his first breakfast order because the Cape window at Blue Harbor Pharmacy opened early on Tuesdays. That was how his life worked. Everything stacked, everything timed. Every minute serving 2 people besides himself. The second life that changed in that crash belonged to Noah Kaplan, 10 years old, sitting in the back seat of a silver 2018 Toyota Prius, while his mother, Rachel Kaplan, waited 1 lane over for the same light. When Mateo's scooter exploded sideways from the impact, it slammed into Rachel's rear door hard enough to spiderweb the glass and send Noah jerking against his booster belt. He did not suffer a major visible injury that day. What he carried home was worse in a slower way. Night terrors, panic in intersections, a shaking fit every time brakes squealed too close. The third life that changed was one Evelyn Mercer never even noticed. It was Anna's. Because when a man who has built his whole world around showing up suddenly cannot pick up his daughter, cannot cook standing upright, cannot walk without pain, cannot work enough to cover rent, a child learns the meaning of fear much earlier than she should. And Evelyn's first words after opening her car door told everyone at the scene exactly who she was back then. "Are you kidding me right now?" Officer Lena Ortiz heard that sentence 10 seconds before she ever heard the word sorry. If you've ever watched someone reveal themselves in an emergency, hit that like button right now. Because the next 5 minutes of body cam footage made even veteran officers grind their teeth. Evelyn had always thought of herself as misunderstood, not cruel. That was her private story. In Barrington, where she owned Mercer Lane Home and Gift, a boutique that sold imported candles, French table linens, brass picture frames, and monogrammed baby blankets that cost more than some weekly grocery bills, people knew her as polished, intense, relentless, and exhausting. She called it standards. Other people called it control. She grew up in Cranston, the daughter of a state trooper and a dental hygienist. Her father, Raymond Bell Mercer, used to shine his shoes every Sunday night and line them under the radiator like soldiers. Her mother, Joan, ironed pillowcases and never left dishes in the sink. Order was love in that house. Performance was safety. Evelyn had learned early that if you looked composed enough, nobody asked whether you were kind. At 26, she married Daniel Mercer, a commercial real estate broker with a bright laugh and expensive taste. At 30, she had their daughter Sophie. At 38, she buried Daniel after a sudden aneurysm collapsed him on a treadmill at the East Side YMCA. After that, the edges in Evelyn sharpened. She did not become loud. She became brittle. She smiled less, tipped worse, and began treating every inconvenience like a personal insult from the universe. By 43, she wore Cartier sunglasses larger than necessary, drove the Range Rover like traffic was a recommendation, and had perfected a tone that could make grown adults apologize for problems they had not caused. That morning, she had been on Bluetooth with her inventory manager, then looking down at a text from a supplier in New York about delayed holiday merchandise. The coffee in her cup holder was from 7 Stars. Her lipstick was still fresh. She had a 9:00 vendor call and a noon lunch with a banker. She did not see Mateo until the last possible instant, and even then her first instinct was not horror. It was annoyance. The bodycam footage later played in court would show the whole brutal sequence in a way no witness ever could. The hiss of a cooling engine, the electronic chirp of a left-turn signal still blinking uselessly, Mateo on the pavement trying to lift himself and failing, one sneaker missing, blood at his hairline, Rachel Kaplan yelling, "Noah, stay in the car, baby, stay in the car." A coffee lid rolling in a widening puddle of oat milk and asphalt grit. And then Evelyn, standing beside her white SUV in a tan coat and cream silk blouse, one hand on her hip, saying, "Somebody needs to call an ambulance, but he flew out of nowhere." Officer Ortiz, her dark braid damp with rain mist, moved straight to Mateo first. "Sir, don't move your neck. Can you hear me?" Mateo's voice came out broken and thin. "My bag, please, the pharmacy bag, my mom's medicine." That one sentence hit Rachel Kaplan harder than the crash itself. She would later testify that she knew, in that moment, exactly which person in the intersection was thinking about others and which one was still thinking about herself. Officer Ortiz turned to Evelyn. "Ma'am, were you using your phone?" Evelyn pushed back a lock of hair and said, "Excuse me. Were you using your phone while driving?" "I was stopped." "You were in the intersection." "He cut across. The light for him was green." "You saw that personally." That was the first time the witnesses began exchanging looks. Not because Evelyn sounded afraid, because she sounded like she was already cross-examining the scene. Drop a comment telling us the exact moment you think a person crosses from panic into entitlement, because for a lot of people watching later, it was right there. Paramedics loaded Mateo onto a stretcher with a vacuum splint on his left leg and a collar around his neck. He kept asking for the scooter, for the bag, for his phone. When Rachel walked over to hand him the pharmacy packet, she saw his fingers trembling so badly he could not hold it. She tucked it into the blanket and told him, "I'll call whoever you need." He said, "My daughter, school, Ana Ruiz, don't scare her." Then he passed out. Noah Kaplan did not cry until the ambulance doors closed. That sound stayed with Rachel for weeks. Not loud, Not dramatic, just a frightened 10-year-old trying to be brave because he thought brave meant quiet. Evelyn, meanwhile, was standing beneath the awning of a closed tailor shop while rain tapped the sidewalk and smeared the city noise into a dull gray hum. She called her assistant. Then she called her insurer. Then, according to phone records later entered into evidence, she called one person before she ever called to ask whether the man she hit was alive. She called attorney Sebastian Pike. If a lawyer has ever made you suspicious the moment he smiled, subscribe now, because Sebastian Pike looked like trouble in a tailored suit. Sebastian was 38, Boston-born, Brown-educated, and professionally addicted to winning. He wore navy Brioni suits with narrow lapels, a steel Rolex GMT Master II, and loafers so polished they reflected courthouse lights. He drove a black Mercedes S-Class he parked just a little too close to handicapped spaces without technically crossing the line. He was the kind of defense attorney who never said his voice because he preferred his confidence concentrated. He specialized in white-collar negotiations, licensing disputes, politically connected messes, and reputation-sensitive resolutions, which was a clean way of saying rich people hired him when they wanted consequences to become paperwork. Evelyn had met him 2 years earlier at a fundraiser for the Rhode Island School of Design museum renovation. He told jokes that sounded expensive. She liked that. He looked at people as if he could see the pressure points in their lives. She liked that too, though she should not have. By noon on the day of the crash, Sebastian Pike was already shaping the case in language that would later nearly destroy Evelyn. "This is not about guilt," he told her in his office on Westminster Street, where a framed Yale law diploma hung behind smoked glass shelves of leather-bound books nobody touched. "This is about narrative. A distracted driver is careless. A successful widow under stress is human. One version gets punished. One version gets managed." Managed. That word felt like relief to Evelyn. It should have sounded like a warning. Matteo spent 2 nights at Rhode Island Hospital. He had 3 cracked ribs, a fractured left wrist, severe bruising along his hip and shoulder, a torn meniscus and 42 stitches above his eyebrow. His scooter was totaled. His phone screen shattered. He missed 16 days of both jobs immediately and lost the Bellini's position completely after the restaurant hired a replacement. Anna stopped sleeping through the night. Rosa, furious and ashamed at being a burden, tried to stand without her walker on the 3rd day after his discharge and fell in the kitchen, adding a sprained wrist to the family's problems. Rachel Kaplan had Noah evaluated twice. The first pediatric exam said mild whiplash and observation. The second, 3 weeks later, documented acute traffic anxiety. He wet the bed twice after being dry for 3 years. He begged his mother to take side streets to school. Once, when a bus exhaled air at a stop sign near them, he covered both ears and screamed. These details mattered because a crash is never just metal. It is the ripple after metal. Prosecutor Helen Bouchard knew that. 46, sharp-eyed, hair cut in a no-nonsense silver bob, she had spent 19 years in municipal and district court watching wealth and charm try to masquerade as innocence. She was not theatrical. She was prepared. Her office smelled like printer toner and black coffee, and she read every page twice. When Officer Ortiz filed the initial report, Helen saw 3 things immediately. First, Evelyn Mercer claimed she had entered on yellow. Second, 2 witnesses said the light had been solid red for at least 3 seconds. Third, the report noted possible phone distraction, but no device seizure at scene because Evelyn had placed her phone in her handbag before the officer could physically confirm active use. That detail bothered Helen. So she pulled everything. Traffic camera footage from Waterman and Brook, exterior surveillance from Blue Harbor Pharmacy, bus stop footage from a private school shuttle idling on the opposite side of the intersection, Officer Ortiz's body cam, vehicle event data recorder downloads from the Range Rover, phone records obtained by subpoena, medical reports, insurance statements, even social media posts, because people who think they are untouchable often tell on themselves by lunchtime. What she found turned the case from ugly to explosive. The Waterman traffic camera showed the Range Rover moving 5 full seconds after the light turned red. The Blue Harbor pharmacy camera captured a faint but clear reflection in Evelyn's windshield. A phone screen illuminated in her right hand. The school shuttle camera, grainier but devastating, showed her head angled downward 2 seconds before impact. And the event recorder showed no meaningful braking until 0.8 seconds before collision. In plain English, she was not reacting to the road. She was reacting to the crash. But the thing that made Helen set her pen down and stare at the wall for a full moment was not a video. It was a voicemail. At 10:03 a.m., while Mateo was still in imaging, Evelyn left a voice message for an employee at Mercer Lane Home and Gift saying, "If anyone asks, I was already parked when that scooter guy clipped me. And please take down the Instagram story from outside the shop because it timestamps my morning." That sentence never made it to a jury because the case would not go that far. But it told Helen exactly what kind of fight she was in. And still, somehow, that was not the worst decision made in this story. The first formal hearing was set for Thursday, January 16, 2026, Providence Municipal Courtroom 3B, case number PM 26417, City of Providence v. Evelyn Mercer. Charges included reckless driving, failure to obey a traffic control device, use of a handheld device while operating a vehicle, and privity. NG materially false statements during an official investigation. Simplified charges, yes, but serious enough, public enough, and attached to footage damning enough that local legal bloggers were already whispering this could become one of those viral courtroom moments people replay for the judge's reaction alone. Judge Frank Caprio had seen every kind of human performance across that bench: tears that came too early, toughness that vanished at sentencing, apologies timed like stage cues. But the reason people respected him was not that he was soft, it was that he was precise. He listened, he remembered, and when he spoke plainly, he landed harder than most judges shouting. Evelyn knew his reputation and misread it completely. He likes second chances, she told Sebastian the night before the hearing. Sebastian adjusted his cufflinks and replied, "Then we'll make this look like a misunderstanding deserving one." At 7:12 a.m. on hearing day, Mateo buttoned a charcoal thrift store blazer over a white shirt Anna had helped him iron. His wrist was still stiff, his limp still visible, especially on stairs. Rosa packed him a small plastic container of sliced mango he did not have time to eat. Anna pressed a folded note into his palm and said, "Read it if you get scared." At 8:05 a.m., Rachel Kaplan parked 2 blocks from the courthouse because Noah, after weeks of refusing, had asked if he could come, just to see if the bad lady says sorry. Rachel almost said no. Then she looked at her son's nervous hands and realized he was trying to reclaim something. So she brought him, in a navy puffer jacket and red sneakers, clutching a little dinosaur keychain like armor. At 8:40 a.m., courthouse clerk Denise Halpern unlocked the side file room and noticed a man in a navy coat waiting too close to the restricted hallway. Sebastian Pike smiled and stepped toward her. Denise was 57, precise, and impossible to charm unless you were her grandson. She had worked court administration for 22 years. She could spot desperation, arrogance, and manipulation by how people stood while waiting. Sebastian stood like a man already deciding where to place his trophy. "Ms. Halpern," he said, "Sebastian Pike for Ms. Mercer. I was hoping to ensure Chambers received a small item before we went on the record." He held a white envelope. Not a legal envelope, not filed papers too thick, too careful. Denise did not take it. "What item?" "A private note," he said smoothly, "and a charitable contribution meant for one of the court's youth initiatives, something His Honor would understand." That phrase made her stomach tighten. The hallway smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and wet wool from people shaking off rain in the lobby. A fluorescent light buzzed overhead. Denise would later say that in those 2 seconds she heard every warning her years in the courthouse had trained into her body. There are things decent people do not carry in white envelopes before a hearing. She said if it concerns the case, you can raise it in open court. If it doesn't, you may keep it. Sebastian's smile changed by half a degree. Less warm, more calculation. "Let's not be rigid," he said softly. "There's $10,000 for the youth fund. The note just asks for perspective." Denise took one slow breath. And then Sebastian Pike made the mistake that ended him. He placed the envelope on the file counter, slid it 2 inches toward her, and tapped it once with a manicured finger. Not much. Just enough to transform suspicion into act. Denise stepped back as though it had become radioactive. "Take that back," she said. Sebastian lowered his voice further. "No one needs drama." From the end of the hallway, Bailiff Marcus Bell had already started walking toward them. Marcus was 6'3", broad-shouldered, former Army military police, a man who moved with the kind of controlled calm people only learn after seeing worse things than courthouse nonsense. He had seen the placement, seen Denise's face, seen the envelope. He did not rush. He did not need to. "Counselor," Marcus said, "step away from the counter." For the first time that morning, Sebastian Pike looked surprised. And that was before anyone checked the surveillance camera mounted above the record's door. If you think the worst thing a person can do is the reckless act, wait until you see the cover-up. Hit that like button if you've ever watched someone destroy themselves trying to avoid admitting one mistake. Marcus escorted Sebastian into a side room and called Court Administrator Samuel Keene, who in turn notified Judge Caprio before calendar began. Denise gave a statement. Security pulled the hallway footage. The envelope was placed, unopened, into a clear evidence bag. Here is the part almost nobody in the courtroom knew at first. Judge Caprio did not cancel the hearing. He reviewed the preliminary reports, listened to Samuel Keene for less than a minute, and said, "We will preserve the proceed carefully, and keep everything on the record when it matters." That decision would turn the morning from scandal into reckoning. Because while Sebastian Pike was busy convincing himself he could explain away one envelope, he did not yet understand how much other evidence was already waiting to bury him and his client's lies. At 9:42 a.m., Courtroom 3B was full. The room had dark wood benches worn smooth by decades of nervous hands. The air carried old paper, winter coats, and a trace of coffee from someone who had gulped too fast in the hallway. A court reporter adjusted her machine. The gallery murmured in low threads until the bailiff called, "All rise." Judge Caprio entered in a black robe, glasses low, expression unreadable. Evelyn sat at defense table beside Sebastian. She wore pearl studs, minimal makeup, and the exact face women like her practice for fundraisers and funerals alike. Sober, composed, beyond reproach. She did not look at Mateo. She glanced once at Rachel and Noah, then away. When Anna peeked from the second row beside Rosa and waved a tiny nervous wave toward her father, Evelyn's jaw tightened as if even that tenderness annoyed her. Case after case moved before theirs. Parking citations, noise complaint, uninsured operation. Then Marcus called City of Providence versus Evelyn Mercer. Everyone in the room seemed to lean half an inch forward. Helen Bouchard rose for the city. Sebastian rose for the defense. Evelyn stood when instructed, then sat. Judge Caprio reviewed the docket, looked at the attorneys and said, "Counsel, I understand there are evidentiary matters and witness testimony. We'll proceed." Not one word about the envelope. Sebastian exhaled, tiny, invisible to most. Not invisible to Caprio. The city called Officer Lena Ortiz first. Her testimony was clean, detailed, and utterly lethal to the defense's preferred narrative. She described weather conditions, traffic flow, pedestrian signal timing, the position of the Range Rover on arrival, Mateo's injuries, Evelyn's statements, the lack of visible braking marks consistent with timely response. When Helen asked whether Evelyn appeared disoriented or medically impaired, Ortiz answered, no. She appeared irritated. A ripple moved through the gallery. Sebastian stood for cross-examination with the easy confidence of a man who had built his career making witnesses sound uncertain. He approached with a yellow legal pad and one of those sympathetic half-smiles that meant the opposite. Officer Ortiz, you arrived after the collision, correct? Yes. So you did not personally see my client holding a phone before impact? No. You did not personally inspect her screen at that moment? No. You cannot say from your own eyes what color the light was when she entered? I can say what the witnesses and camera footage later confirmed. But not from your own eyes? No. Sebastian nodded as if scoring points. Then he asked the question that made people in the gallery stare at him. And Mr. Ruiz was operating a motor scooter in a congested city corridor during morning rush, yes. Yes. A vehicle known for weaving. Helen stood immediately. Objection argumentative. Sustained, Judge Caprio said. Sebastian smiled. Withdrawn. Let me ask it another way. Officer, did you test Mr. Ruiz for fatigue, given that delivery drivers often work irregular hours? Mateo's face changed. Not rage, hurt. Because there is something uniquely ugly about being injured, and then treated like your poverty is evidence against you. Officer Ortiz answered, no, because fatigue was not the cause of the defendant running a red light. That landed. Even Judge Caprio wrote something down. Share this with someone who needs to see how fast the room turns when a lawyer stops seeking truth and starts insulting the injured. Next came Rachel Kaplan. She was 35, a middle school science teacher with dark curls pulled into a loose bun and the exhausted steadiness of a mother who had repeated the same nightmare back to doctors, insurers, and now lawyers for weeks. She described waiting at the light, seeing Mateo move lawfully through the intersection, seeing the Range Rover continue, hearing the impact, hearing Noah gasp. She described how he no longer slept properly and how intersections became battlefields in his mind. When Helen asked what she remembered most clearly, Rachel's voice wavered for the first time. The sound after, she said, not the crash, the little sounds, the scooter scraping, Noah breathing too fast, Mr. Ruiz asking for his mother's medicine, and Ms. Mercer asking if this was really happening to her. A woman in the back row muttered, wow, before catching herself. Sebastian rose again. Ms. Kaplan, I'm sorry your son was frightened. Rachel looked at him as if she could already hear the trap. But Noah was medically cleared the same day, correct? With follow-up care. No surgery, no hospitalization. He was 10. Of course, my point is physical injury was minimal. Rachel's spine straightened. My son flinches when a car stops too hard, she said. If that's minimal to you, I don't know what is. Even the court reporter blinked. Sebastian tried to pivot, and you dislike my client. I don't know your client, Rachel said. I know what she did and what she refused to admit. That line would later end up clipped all over social media, not because it was loud, because it was clean. Then Helen called Mateo Ruiz. When Mateo stood, the room shifted again. He walked carefully, favoring his left side. His blazer fit a little tight in the shoulders. The scar above his eyebrow had turned pale pink, a line that made him look older than 29. He swore in, sat, and folded Anna's note under his palm on the witness stand like it was a talisman. Helen took him through the morning in simple order: the pharmacy stop, the green light, the sound of an engine where one should not have been, the pavement, the pain, his worry for Rosa, his lost wages, the canceled shifts, the months of therapy he still faced. She introduced hospital records, repair estimates, pay stubs, and photos of the scooter twisted near the rear wheel like soft metal. Then she asked the question everyone in the room felt before he answered. What changed most in your home after the crash? Mateo swallowed. I couldn't lift my daughter for weeks, he said. My mother tried not to ask for help because she saw me hurting. She skipped physical therapy once because I couldn't get her there. Anna started waking up to make sure I was still breathing because she saw blood on my shirt that day. Silence. Real silence. One of those courtroom moments where no one shifts in the bench because everybody knows the truth has just arrived without performance. Then Sebastian Pike stood up and tried to crush it. Mr. Ruiz, you work multiple jobs, correct? Yes. You were tired that morning. I was awake. That wasn't my question. I was tired the way working people are tired. A few heads in the gallery nodded without meaning to. Sebastian kept going. You carry deliveries on a scooter in all conditions. Yes. You chose that vehicle knowing city streets are dangerous. Cars are dangerous when drivers ignore lights. Helen almost smiled. Judge Caprio didn't, but his glasses lowered another fraction. Sebastian changed angle. Were you under financial stress before this incident? Mateo looked confused. Yes. So it is fair to say this case represents potential financial relief. Helen was up before the sentence fully landed. Objection. Sustained, said Judge Caprio, sharper now. Move on, counselor. But Sebastian, who had tasted blood in other courtrooms and thought he could always push 1 inch farther, turned 1 inch farther again. Mr. Ruiz, isn't it true you asked at the scene whether Ms. Mercer would pay cash? Mateo stared. No, he said. Officer Ortiz from the back visibly tightened. Helen stood again. Objection. Misstates prior statements and lacks foundation. Judge Caprio looked directly at Sebastian Pike for the first long beat of the day. Counselor, he said very softly, the line between advocacy and distortion is not blurry. Don't act as if it is. That sentence chilled the room. Sebastian sat, but not before straightening his tie with a little extra force. He had been warned. And yet somehow, he still believed the morning could be saved. That belief lasted exactly 11 more minutes. Because Helen Bouchard then said the words that changed the air in the room. The city moves to admit Exhibit 12. If you've ever felt your stomach drop before the truth appears on a screen, hit subscribe. Because this was the moment everything began to crack. Exhibit 12 was not one video. It was a synchronized compilation. Traffic camera, pharmacy exterior, school shuttle angle, Officer Ortiz's body cam, all time-stamped and aligned. Helen asked, the lights dimmed. The monitor flickered alive. First angle, wide intersection, wet pavement, pedestrian signal blinking white. Second angle, side profile of the Range Rover approaching too fast for the conditions. Third angle, the reflected glow of a phone screen in the windshield. Fourth angle, Mateo entering loftily. Then impact. A woman in the gallery covered her mouth. The synchronized bodycam audio picked up seconds later, Officer Ortiz running in, Rachel shouting, Noah crying, Mateo asking for his mother's medication, and Evelyn saying unmistakably, "Can't we handle this without making it a whole thing? I can just pay him." Not "I'm sorry." Not "Is he alive?" I can just pay him. The lights came back up slowly, and if you want to know what collective judgment looks like, It looks like 50 strangers realizing at the same moment that the victim had told the truth, the witness had told the truth, the officer had told the truth, and the defense had spent the morning trying to make truth look negotiable. Evelyn's face had gone pale beneath her foundation. Sebastian leaned toward her and whispered something no microphone caught. She whispered back, "You said that footage was useless." Helen wasn't done. She introduced the vehicle data report showing delayed braking, then the phone records showing Evelyn sent a text at 8:16 a.m., just seconds before impact, then the voicemail transcript to her employee, then still photographs of the damage path establishing her lane intrusion. Each piece clicked into place with the brutal neatness of a lock closing. By now, everyone in the room knew. This was no misunderstanding. This was recklessness, followed by deception, polished with entitlement. And then Judge Caprio said, "We will take a 10-minute recess." It sounded ordinary. It was not. Because as the room began to stir, he lifted one hand slightly and added, "Counselor Pike, Ms. Bouchard, Clerk Halpern, Bailiff Bell, and Administrator Keene will remain." That was the moment Evelyn turned fully toward her attorney. "What now?" she whispered. Sebastian swallowed once, "Stay calm." But he was no longer calm. His right hand, the one usually so steady, had begun to tremble against his legal pad. The gallery filed out buzzing in hushed currents. Mateo returned to Anna and Rosa. Rachel crouched beside Noah, who kept asking if it was over. Officer Ortiz stood by the side wall. Helen closed her binder and did not sit down. When the doors shut, the courtroom became smaller. More dangerous. Judge Caprio looked at Marcus. Marcus stepped forward carrying a clear evidence bag. Inside it sat the white envelope. For the first time, Evelyn saw it. She frowned. "What is that?" Sebastian did not answer. Denise Halpern did. "It's what your attorney tried to pass to Chambers before court began." You could hear Evelyn inhale. Then Caprio rested his fingertips on the bench and said the line people would replay millions of times. "Money belongs in settlement, fees, fines, and lawful charity. It does not arrive secretly in my courtroom before a hearing. Open it now." Sebastian stood so abruptly his chair scraped hard against the floor. "Your Honor, I object to this characterization. I intended a private charitable donation." "Open it," Caprio repeated. Samuel Keene broke the evidence seal. Marcus removed the envelope and spilled its contents onto the defense table under camera view. 10 crisp $100 bills. Then 10 more. Then 10 more. A stack totaling $10,000. And beneath it, a folded cream card with Sebastian Pike's monogram embossed in blue. Marcus handed the note to Caprio. Caprio read it once. His face did not change. That made it worse. He passed it to Helen, then to Samuel. Finally, he read it into the record. "For the youth outreach calendar with respect, let's keep perspective on Mercer. No need to make a bad morning into a life-changing headline. Gratefully, SB." No one moved. No one breathed normally. Evelyn stared at Sebastian as if she had never seen him before. "Did you do that?" she whispered. Sebastian found his voice and made himself worse with every word. "This is being interpreted in the most hostile possible light," he said. "There is nothing unlawful about donating to civic good causes. The note asks for perspective, not outcome." Judge Caprio leaned back. And when he spoke, his tone was so calm it landed like a hammer wrapped in velvet. "Counselor, if you cannot tell the difference between generosity and corruption, then your education failed, your ethics failed, or both. Mercy is never for sale in this room." That was quote number one people never forgot. Helen Bouchard did not raise her voice. She did not need to. "The city requests immediate referral to the Rhode Island Bar Disciplinary Board," and any appropriate criminal ethics review, she said. Samuel Keene nodded. Security footage captures the placement and language. Denise added, I refused the envelope. Bailiff Bell witnessed the exchange as it occurred. Judge Caprio turned to Sebastian. Do you dispute the footage exists? Sebastian's lips parted. Closed. Opened again. No, Your Honor. Do you dispute placing the envelope on the counter? No. Do you dispute the note is yours? It is. And yet you wish the court to believe this was innocent. Sebastian did not answer. Judge Caprio looked at Evelyn next. Ms. Mercer, did you know about this? Every eye in the room moved to her. This was the choice moment, the kind that decides not just consequence but character. Evelyn's throat worked, no. It came out fast, reflexive, almost automatic. And then, from the second row near the gallery door where Anna, Rachel, and Noah had not yet fully cleared the room, a voice spoke before anyone could stop it. That's not all the way true, Mom. It was Sophie Mercer. 17 years old, dark wool school coat, blonde hair like Evelyn's but looser, less defended. She had come late from St. Catherine Academy, arriving during the video playback and slip. Ping into the back unnoticed by her mother. She was supposed to be in calculus. Instead, she was standing in a courtroom, looking at Evelyn with the shattered expression children wear when they see the adult myth collapse. Evelyn turned slowly. Sophie. Sophie's chin trembled. You said last night you didn't care what Sebastian had to do. You said, fix this, smooth it over, make it disappear. I heard you. That sentence hit harder than the cash. Because a bribery note can be blamed on greed. A daughter's voice cannot. Evelyn closed her eyes, as if bracing against impact all over again. I didn't tell him to do this, she said weakly. But you wanted him to, Sophie replied. You just didn't want to know how. No one in that room forgot Sophie Mercer's face. Not because she was loud. Because she sounded heartbroken, not angry. There is a truth children speak that adults cannot defend against. Judge Caprio let the silence sit. Then he said, we will bring the parties back on the record. When the doors reopened and the gallery filtered in again, something had changed in the room. People knew, even if they did not yet know details. You can feel scandal before it is explained. It moves like heat. Heads lean. Whispers quicken. Even the wooden benches seem to listen harder. Sebastian Pike was ordered to a separate side seat away from Evelyn. Given developments that may expose serious ethical and criminal concerns, Judge Caprio said on the record, Mr. Pike will no longer address the merits of Ms. Mercer's defense at this moment. He is referred for immediate review. Ms. Mercer, you may request time to obtain alternate counsel, proceed with appointed advisory counsel, or speak for yourself regarding factual matters already before the court. Evelyn looked stunned. For the first time all morning, she looked small. Not elegant, not composed, small. There is a moment in public humiliation where the costume falls off faster than the person inside can adjust. She had spent months believing money, polish, and a clever man in a navy suit could contain this. Now that man sat isolated, red-faced, under the stare of every stranger in the room, and she was alone with the facts. Like this video, if you believe consequences feel different when you can't outsource them anymore. Helen asked to proceed on liability and disposition. Caprio allowed a short consultation with advisory counsel from the courthouse list, a young public defender named Malik Thompson, who had stepped in for emergency procedural guidance. Malik was 32, measured, and clearly furious on Evelyn's behalf only in the sense that any lawyer hates seeing a client poisoned by another lawyer's vanity. He leaned close and said words that changed her trajectory. You can keep performing, he told her quietly, or you can salvage the one thing still available to you, which is honesty. Evelyn stared at the wood grain of the table. All morning she had felt injustice narrowing toward her. Now, for the first time, she saw the possibility that what was narrowing was not injustice. It was truth. When proceedings resumed, Judge Caprio asked one simple question. Ms. Mercer, do you contest the video evidence showing you entered on red while using your phone? And this was where the old Evelyn might have kept digging. Might have said she did not recall. Might have said the angle was misleading. Might have asked for delay. Might have blamed grief, rain, traffic, pressure, anything but herself. Instead, she looked at Mateo. Really looked at him. At the scar, the brace, the exhaustion in the corners of his eyes, at Anna sitting beside Rosa with both hands folded in her lap, at Noah leaning against his mother, watching as if this answer might teach him what adults do after hurting people. Then Evelyn Mercer began to cry. Not elegantly. Not a single controlled tear. It hit her like the collapse of a wall. Yes, she said, I was on my phone, I ran the red light. The courtroom exhaled. She kept going. And I lied. I lied to Officer Ortiz. I lied to my staff. I let my lawyer turn these people into obstacles because I was afraid of what it would mean if I admitted what I did. She touched her face, realizing too late her hands were shaking. I didn't tell him to bribe anyone. I didn't know about the envelope. But Sophie is right. I told him to make it disappear. I cared more about my reputation than the people I hurt. Caprio did not interrupt. Neither did Helen. Because sometimes the truth comes out with its own momentum. Evelyn turned slightly toward Mateo. I heard you ask for your mother's medicine that day. I heard you, and I still kept thinking about myself. I've replayed that voice in my head, and even then I still chose myself over what was right. I'm sorry feels too small, but it is true. I am sorry. Then she looked at Rachel and Noah. I told myself he was fine because it was easier than facing what fear does to a child. That was cruel. I am sorry. And then some. How hardest of all, she turned to Sophie. You deserved a better example. The room was so still, the faint hum of the overhead vent became audible. This could have been the satisfaction moment alone. Arrogance broken, lies exposed, smug attorney disgraced, judge unmoved by money. Viewers would have shared that clip all week. But then came the twist nobody expected. Judge Caprio asked Mateo if he wished to be heard before disposition. Mateo stood carefully. He unfolded Anna's note and looked at it once, then tucked it back into his pocket. I wanted justice, he said. I still do, but I need to say something. He glanced at Evelyn, and his voice held no softness at first, only truth. When you hit me, I thought I was going to die in the street while worrying about my mother's insulin. Then while I was trying to walk again, your lawyer acted like I was some hustler looking for money. That hurt in a different way. It made me feel like being poor was the crime. A murmur ran through the gallery. Mateo lifted a hand. But my daughter asked me last night what happens if the person who did the wrong thing finally tells the truth. She said, do they still get a chance to do good after that? Now people were leaning in with the kind of attention no editing trick can manufacture. Mateo swallowed. I don't want her destroyed just so I can feel powerful for 5 minutes. I want my bills paid. I want Noah's therapy covered. I want her license suspended because she should not be behind a wheel until she understands what she did. I want community service where she has to see the people who live with pain after crashes. And I want her to tell the truth in public, not because it helps me, but because maybe it stops the next person like her. That was the unexpected compassion moment. Not softness. Standards. Standards with a heartbeat. Rachel Kaplan stood too, with permission. I agree, she said. My son doesn't need revenge. He needs proof that grown-ups can take responsibility. Noah looked up at Caprio and whispered something to his mother. Rachel bent down, listened, then smiled sadly. He says he wants her to promise not to text at lights ever again, Rachel said. There was a brief, almost disbelieving ripple of laughter through tears in the room. Even Judge Caprio's expression gentled. And then Ana Ruiz, who had been quiet the entire hearing, tugged her grandmother's sleeve, and Rosa lifted her hand to get the court's attention. Judge Caprio nodded permission. Rosa spoke in Spanish first, then slowly in English so Ana could hear the words in the language she was learning hardest. When someone breaks a dish in my kitchen, Rosa said, I don't keep the pieces to stab them with. I make them help clean it. Then I teach them how not to break the next one. That was quote number 2. And suddenly, the story became bigger than punishment. It became about what justice looks like when wisdom is in the room. If you believe accountability means more than humiliation, subscribe right now, because this is where the story stopped being just a takedown and became something people needed to hear. Judge Caprio folded his hands. Ms. Mercer, he said, an apology after evidence is revealed is often strategy, but sometimes if it continues after the mask breaks, it can become the start of character. I cannot judge your soul. I can judge your conduct. And your conduct was reckless, dishonest, and then made worse by the company you chose to keep. That was quote number 3. He turned slightly toward Sebastian Pike. And counselor, the loudest sound in any courtroom is the silence after a lie collapses. You will be hearing a great deal of that silence where you're headed next. Quote number 4. The room practically held its breath, trying to absorb every word. Then Caprio delivered the ruling. On the reckless driving and signal violation counts, he imposed substantial fines and court costs at the top end, permitted within the municipal framework. On the phone use violation, he imposed the statutory maximum. On the false statement finding, he entered formal judgment and referred the matter to the district prosecutor for any further review warranted by the record. He ordered a 90-day license suspension effective immediately. He ordered full restitution totaling $48,620 to Mateo Ruiz for medical costs, lost wages, therapy, and property loss, plus $12,400 to Rachel Kaplan for Noah's treatment and vehicle damage, with an enforceable payment schedule reviewed monthly. He ordered 200 hours of community service, no exceptions, to be completed at Rhode Island Hospital's Rehabilitation Volunteer Program and the Providence Safe Streets Initiative, specifically including victim impact panels. He required Evelyn to fund, without publicity branding, a 1-year defensive driving scholarship program for working delivery riders and low-income teen driver education app. Lickens through a city-approved nonprofit. He required her to return to the same court after 6 months for a compliance review. Then he said the sentence that completed the room. Punishment teaches the law. Responsibility teaches the soul. If you do only the first, you will leave here poorer. If you do the second, you might leave here better. Quote number 5. Evelyn covered her mouth and cried harder than before. Not because she thought it was unfair. Because she knew it was fair. Sebastian Pike, meanwhile, tried one last time to recover himself. Your Honor, I request the record reflect my client should not be prejudiced by allegations against counsel, not yet adjudicated. Caprio turned his gaze on him like a door closing. Mr. Pike, your client was prejudiced by your arrogance long before this morning. Sit down. That line detonated in the room. Even people trying to be professional could not hide it. Eyes widened, brows rose. Someone in the back actually let out a tiny involuntary This was the moment that would go viral by lunch, not because the judge was cruel, because he was exact. Sebastian sat. For once, he had nothing clever left. But the story still was not over. Because as Marcus moved to escort Pike for administrative processing on the referral, Sophie Mercer stood and said, voice shaking. "Wait." Everyone looked at her. She stepped toward the well of the courtroom, clutching something folded. "It's a letter," she said. "I wrote it last night in case my mom kept lying today. I don't know if I'm allowed to read it." Caprio glanced at Helen, then nodded once. Briefly. Sophie opened the page with both hands. It trembled. "When Dad died," she read, "Mom started believing being in control was the same as being safe. I think she got scared and turned mean. Not all the time, but enough. I'm not saying that to excuse her. I'm saying it because if she actually changes after today, I want the record to show there was still something in her worth saving. And if she doesn't change, then at least someone said the truth out loud." By the time she finished, Evelyn was bent forward, crying into both hands. This was the breakdown and breakthrough all at once. Public humiliation had cracked her. Her daughter's faith, conditional and trembling, forced her to decide what would grow in the crack. That afternoon, clips from Courtroom 3B began spreading faster than anyone expected. First local legal accounts, then justice channels, then reposts with captions like "Lawyer tries to buy mercy from Judge Caprio," then reaction threads, then duets, then headlines about the envelope, the note, the daughter, the ruling, the one-liners. By evening, people were calling it one of the most talked-about courtroom moments of the year. But what made it endure was not the bribe attempt. It was what came after. Because a spectacular backfire is satisfying. A real change is unforgettable. Weeks passed. Sebastian Pike was suspended pending full disciplinary proceedings. His firm issued a sterile statement about conduct inconsistent with internal standards, which nobody believed reflected surprise. Court-adjacent gossip unearthed other whispers, questionable settlement overtures, improper communications, nothing formally proven yet beyond the Mercer matter, but enough that former clients began making calls they had not planned to make. As for Evelyn, the first week after court was brutal. Her license was surrendered. Her boutique's online reviews turned vicious. 2 corporate vendors paused contracts. 1 charity board quietly asked for her resignation. A photo of her leaving court in tears, coat open, face bare, went everywhere. The internet called her a Karen, a monster, a symbol, a warning. Some of that felt deserved. Some of it felt bloodthirsty. All of it was public. The old Evelyn would have hired a publicist and called herself targeted. The new version had not fully formed yet, but it had one advantage. It no longer had the strength to lie. On her second day of community service orientation at Rhode Island Hospital's rehab unit, she met Bernard Ellis, 59, a former bus driver relearning balance after a collision caused by a distracted driver. He recognized her immediately. Of course he did. Half the country seemed to. He looked at her volunteer badge and said, not kindly, "You the red light lady." Evelyn nodded. Bernard adjusted the walker in front of him. "Good. Then carry this chair where I can reach it and don't make me ask twice." She carried the chair. Then the next. Then the next. Humility does not arrive as a feeling. It arrives as repetition. She wheeled linen carts, restocked hand sanitizer, read intake packets to patients whose hands hurt too much to hold paper. She listened to a woman describe how one crash left her unable to braid her granddaughter's hair. She watched physical therapists celebrate a man lifting his foot half an inch higher than yesterday. She learned the smell of antiseptic in warm soup trays. She learned the patience of halls where progress is measured in tiny movements. At Providence Safe Streets, she sat through victim impact panels where teenagers spoke about siblings killed at crosswalks, where delivery workers described choosing between speed and survival, where a retired firefighter said, "A phone can steal a life faster than a bottle these days because people still think it's harmless until the scream." That line stayed in her bones. 3 weeks in, she sold the Range Rover. People online mocked the symbolism, but it mattered privately. She used part of the proceeds to accelerate the first restitution payment and the scholarship fund Judge Caprio had ordered. She bought a used blue Subaru Outback once her suspension period neared completion, not because modesty is magic, but because the old car felt like armor she no longer wanted. At home, change was slower. Sophie did not forgive her in one speech. Why would she? Trust does not work like a montage. The first few dinners were mostly silent. The clink of forks against plates, the refrigerator hum, the soft scratching of Rosa Ruiz's handwriting in a thank you card Evelyn had not yet opened because she could not imagine deserving it. But over time, Sophie began asking what the rehab patients were like, then whether the scholarship fund had received applications. Then one night while drying dishes, she said, "You're different when you talk to people now. You wait." That may have been the most important compliment Evelyn had ever received. Like this video, if you believe real redemption is quiet before it is public. 6 months later, on Thursday, July 23, 2026, case PM 26-417 returned to Courtroom 3B for compliance review. The room was not as packed as the first time, but fuller than ordinary. People remembered. Some came hoping for failure. Some came hoping the story had earned its second chapter. Evelyn arrived at 8:31 a.m., 15 minutes early, in a navy J.Crew blazer, flat black shoes, minimal makeup, and no attempt at expensive theater. She carried a thick binder. No attorney, by choice. Mateo arrived with Anna, whose front teeth had started to grow in crooked and adorable, and Rosa, walking a little stronger with a floral cane. Rachel came with Noah, now willing to sit near windows again. Helen Bouchard was there. Officer Ortiz too. Denise Halpern and Marcus Bell exchanged one glance that said they had seen every kind of follow-up, and they were not sure yet which kind this would be. When Caprio took the bench, the first thing he asked was simple. "Ms. Mercer, how have you done?" That was it. Not perform for us. Not impress us. How have you done? Evelyn stood. "I completed 218 service hours," she said. "I paid restitution in full 3 weeks early. The scholarship fund has awarded 19 grants so far, including 7 to delivery workers seeking advanced rider training and 5 teen applicants from low-income households. I've attached proof of all payments, program reports, and attendance records." Caprio nodded. "And beyond the paperwork?" She took a breath. "Beyond the paperwork, I learned I was using control as a substitute for character," she said. "I hurt people, then I treated their pain like an inconvenience to my image. The work didn't erase that. It just stopped me from hiding from it." No flourish, no tears weaponized for sympathy, just clean truth. Then she turned, unexpectedly, and handed copies of sealed letters through the clerk to the court. "One is from Bernard Ellis at the rehab unit. One is from the Safe Streets coordinator. And one is from me, but it's addressed to the Ruiz family and the Kaplan family, not the court. They can read it later if they want, or not. That choice belongs to them." Caprio read the institutional letters first. Bernard's note was written in large, uneven print. It said in part, "She showed up on time, did ugly work without complaint, and listened more than she talked. I still don't like what she did, but I believe she knows what she did now." That line brought a soft wave of recognition through the gallery. The Safe Streets coordinator's letter described Evelyn speaking to driver education classes without naming herself as a victim of cancel culture or bad luck. She introduced herself the same way each time. "I am the reason 3 people still carry fear." Then she described the crash, the lie, and the cost. People did not expect that. They expected image repair. What they got was ownership. Then Caprio asked if the victims wished to speak. Rachel went first. "Noah sleeps through the night again," she said. "He still notices red lights more than most children, but he gets in the car without shaking. Ms. Mercer covered every treatment bill exactly as ordered. More importantly, she wrote my son an apology that didn't ask him to make her feel better. That mattered. Noah, now a little braver, raised his hand. Caprio smiled and let him talk. She sent me a dinosaur book, Noah said, and she wrote that stopping all the way.